Square put out a results briefing session for the 3-month period that ended on June 30th, 2025. Net sales and profits are down year over year for Square Enix's MMOs. And that's not all. We have numbers. Final Fantasy XIV has found itself on some hard times. In this video, I'll go over the numbers themselves, how I believe we got here, and why I'm optimistic for the game's future. Hello everyone, I am Jmulls, and let's get right into this. So let's begin by looking at the financial results briefing session for the 3-month period that ended June 30th, 2025. This was posted on August 8th, 2025, and I'll leave a link in the description down below if you wish to peruse this yourself, because it contains a lot of information about the financial state of Square Enix overall, but what I care about for this video is the digital entertainment section for MMOs, where we can see them say right here, net sales and profits down year over year, with the net sales being 9.6 billion yen, with the prior fiscal year being 12.5 billion yen, so it's down 2.9 billion yen year over year. And the operating income being 3.6 billion yen, where the prior fiscal year was at 6.6 billion yen, down 3 billion yen year over year. And they even say the main titles in this operation, the games largely responsible for these numbers, are both Final Fantasy XIV with Dawntrail and Dragon Quest X, where Dragon Quest X last received its major update on May 14th of this year, and Final Fantasy XIV just had patch 7.3 on August 5th, 2025, though remember, this is for the 3-month period that ended back in June on the 30th. And while they don't tell us specifically how much Final Fantasy XIV or Dragon Quest X are individually responsible for these numbers, I think it's fair to assume that the majority, the biggest slice of the pie here, is Final Fantasy XIV. It's the game with the biggest global presence, but at the same time, I don't think it's fair to say that Final Fantasy XIV is individually responsible for the operating income going down 3 billion yen year over year, because it's not the only game in this umbrella. I think it's natural for some people to say, well, maybe these numbers are a result of the launch of Dawntrail last year, boosting this section. Dawntrail didn't come out, properly at least, until July 2nd, 2024, though it did have early access that began on June 28th. So you imagine pre-orders for the expansion at least may somewhat be taken into account for that section last year. Again, assuming they are comparing it directly to the 3-month period last year in 2024 that ended on June 30th, which makes sense to me because they're saying year over year here. So I don't think it's necessarily that wild to see a decline here, especially for, say, Final Fantasy XIV, the year after an expansion comes out, compared to the time period when an expansion was coming out. But I think seeing such a decline in operating income is something to, point out and to understand that Houston, there's probably a problem here. Like, going down 3 billion yen compared to where you're at 6.6 billion yen last year, that is a huge drop-off. Can you try to hand wave and excuse some of that? Sure, but I think it would be rather foolish to not assume that a good chunk of this is a direct result of the quality of the product Dawntrail has had throughout its lifespan. There are a lot of people that are either not pleased with the current state of the game, or they're genuinely upset. There will always be very loud people on the internet that will be upset over anything and everything. They're annoying, no one wants to interact with them, we can all understand, we can all agree on that one. However, to dismiss a lot of the criticism that people have had for Dawntrail over its lifespan, and even going back further in Final Fantasy XIV's lifespan, and to just lump it all together with the very loud and obnoxious people that want to make sure that hating Final Fantasy XIV is a personality trait for them, I think doesn't do anyone any good, and I don't think it improves the state of the game. And if you've been following what I've been covering for Final Fantasy XIV, you'll know one of the things I've been focusing in on are the words Yoshi P has been saying when it comes to these interviews and these live letters, specifically when he talks about this change in philosophy he wants to have with Final Fantasy XIV. So let's talk about it. One of the things that Yoshi P really focused in on when it came to the lead up and build up for 7.3 was how he wanted people to change their perspective on how Final Fantasy XIV approaches content. And he talked about how people often view the even numbered patches to be for hardcore players and the odd number patches to be for more casual players. So if you're a hardcore player, chances are an odd numbered patch wasn't going to have too much for you, and if you weren't a hardcore player, chances are an even numbered patch wasn't going to have too much for you. So you would have these giant swaths of the game's lifespan where there just wasn't much being updated in the game to appeal to you as a player. I think we as the player base can go an even step further from that. One of the biggest things people have talked about to critique Final Fantasy XIV has been the overall launch cadence for content. The accursed wait for the .x5 patch, which we're kind of dealing with right now. It's like, I loved the story in 7.3, we'll get to that. But for the bulk of the new content that's going to keep people coming back for hours on end to replay, we have to wait for 7.35 like we had to wait for 7.25 for the Occult Crescent. And for these big, giant pieces of content, having to wait months and months, not only after the main patch comes out, but also after the expansion initially comes out in .0, is a massive buzzkill for a lot of people, naturally so, because the start of an expansion is when hype is at its peak. It's at its purest. People want to play the game, they're excited for the game, and if you don't feed the beast there, they'll just get hungry and go somewhere else. And it's hard to rekindle that excitement once you've shown people that they're going to be disappointed time and time again. We've also covered in one of those interviews that Yoshi P gave about 7.3, specifically when talking about cosmic exploration, one of the things they need to keep in mind and to address in the future is how engaging and fun content is when you play it. And I know that sounds really obvious, right? But it's been one of the things I've been hopping on about for Final Fantasy XIV for a while at this point. Is when they ask you to do a grind. Sure, the grind itself may not be that bad compared to older MMOs, but the things they're asking you to do while you do that grind are often extremely boring, dull, and repetitious, and they don't make me actively engage with the product, they make me bored out of my freaking mind. I think cosmic exploration can be a prime example of this. There's only so many times I can do these stellar missions over and over and over again until I'm just like, this isn't that fun. This chase doesn't feel worth it. Even if the chase itself isn't all that bad. Even if you're not asking me to do all that much every day, the game itself shouldn't feel like a chore when I'm trying to play and enjoy it. The feeling I get when I want to play Final Fantasy XIV shouldn't be, oh my god, I have to go in and do my dailies here, I gotta go over there to do this. Not that particularly fun and interesting, they're kind of mind-numbing, but at least they're quick, I guess. It should be, oh hell yeah dude, I want to go get this, so I'm gonna go do all of this in order to make more progress so I can get this. I can't wait to do this. That's the excitement, that's the feeling Final Fantasy XIV should have, and for some people, it probably 100% does. But I think for a lot of people out there, a lot of the content Final Fantasy XIV offers, especially nowadays, doesn't provide that level of excitement, and instead provides the, oh, okay, so I have this checklist of things I need to do. It's not that fun, but I guess I can do it. It's not that quick in the grand scheme of things, but like, in terms of what it's asking me to do right now, I guess it's not that bad. At some point, people are just going to check out when a lot of the more casual and even mid-core content in this game just feels like that. And look, at the end of the day, Square Enix is a business. You can look online to gauge sentiment all you want, but that sometimes can be unreliable and can just be a case of a few very loud people being way louder than the more silent majority. But this is one of the reasons why I think we're seeing them talk about massive philosophical changes in design for Final Fantasy XIV going into the future, because they're seeing it on the money side of things. They're seeing that downward trend. We covered the numbers we have from Lucky Bancho showing a decline in interest and people playing Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, especially when compared to previous expansions. We have this results briefing session for Square Enix as well. People can misinterpret data, but data itself doesn't lie. And I think it's just common sense that we would see Final Fantasy XIV and Square Enix try to go in a new direction for the game, or at least a different direction, and pivot on what what is known, because what is known is clearly not working right now. And I know some people will go, oh, they're only changing things because people have stopped playing, or at least some people have stopped playing, and like, yeah, duh, their business, of course that would happen. We can argue that probably they should have had this change in perspective way earlier. We can argue that all day, absolutely. But like, as a business, if you're seeing things go down, of course you're going to try to do something different and not just stay the course. Unless you believe it's an external factor affecting these numbers, and I just don't believe that to be the case here when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, at least in a significant way. It's like, you can only blame the pandemic so much until it just becomes an excuse that no longer applies that much. At some point, you have to blame the product. So the question now becomes, can they rebound, can they course correct, and can they right this ship? And honestly, I think they can. I think they can absolutely rebound from what's happened with Dawntrail, and I think they already have started. I think the story has increased in overall quality and pacing and tone and characterization and writing and dialogue massively from 0.0, and the story is a massive part of Final Fantasy XIV. It's easily one of, if not the most talked about element of the game, so when it puts out a story that for a lot of people is a miss, when it came to 7.0 Dawntrail, of course that was going to have a massive effect. But now Dawntrail's story has concluded, and on a rather high note. I absolutely loved what they did with 0.3, and I still hold to that. But for a lot of people, they're going to need more time and to see even more consistency from the writing team at Square Enix when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV going into the future. I think the best thing they could do is just knock it out of the park when it comes to 8.0, and that's just for everything. They need to find a way to spark excitement and joy out of job design again, because we can debate all day long about the issues with job design in Final Fantasy XIV and how long it's been going on, but I think it's fair to say for a lot of people, one of the biggest pieces of criticism that I always see for Final Fantasy XIV is people becoming less and less interested with job design, for whatever reason. Whether it's because the jobs are becoming far too simple, or because of too much homogenization, or not enough, or any customization. People have their own individual gripes when it comes to their own job, or overall job design in Final Fantasy XIV. I think they need to address that when it comes to 8.0, and the other, and for me, arguably, the biggest thing they could do, outside of just telling a great story from here on out with 0.4 and 0.5, and then knocking it out of the park with 8.0, fix the release schedule for this game. The breaks between patches are huge now, and it's not just because of the time between the patches. The fact that it took until 7.25 for the Occult Crescent to come online for the game, and then 7.35 for the Deep Dungeon, and then probably 7.45 for the Variant Dungeon is laughable. Something needs to come online way earlier in the expansion, and I do not think Chaotic Raiding can fill that role. It's a cool thing to have as supplementary content, but you need that big piece of replayable content online in the expansion way early. You can release other stuff down the line as well, don't get me wrong. It's just you need something way closer to the launch of the expansion that can make the expansion feel unique and exciting and new, to where it doesn't feel like you can do the story for 0.0, get ready for the raid, and then go fate grind. It's like, buddy, what are we doing? The game needs more stuff to do. The game needs to be exciting, and I do think they want to go in that direction. I am not someone who is overly pessimistic about the future of Final Fantasy XIV. In fact, I talked about how optimistic I am for the future of Final Fantasy XIV before, and even recently so, and I still hold to those opinions. I think they do want to change some elements of the game moving forward, and you can go, yeah, it's because people are not playing it, and they're losing money, and yeah, duh, but if it means we can get a better game when it comes to 8.0 and 8.x, good. I really like how they're approaching the new Deep Dungeon for 7.35, and trying to appeal to not only a hardcore demographic there, but also a more casual audience. When Yoshi P talked about in the live letter for 7.3 that for every 10 pieces of content they put out, they want 7 of those pieces of content to appeal to pretty much everyone, I can understand the knee-jerk reaction of pessimism there, where it's like, well, if you try to appeal to everyone, you're gonna end up pleasing no one. Sure, but like, in moderation. I like the overall strategy they have for the Deep Dungeon. Do I think the Deep Dungeon itself is going to be the best piece of content the game ever puts out? Probably not. I mean, it looks like a Deep Dungeon, just with a few good changes to its overall design and leniency. But at the end of it all, it still looks like a Deep Dungeon dungeon, but I think what that deep dungeon and what Quantum could represent for the future of the game, when you peel back the layers and you look at the design philosophy going into this content, it shows a shift in perspective, one that I think is healthy for the game's future. Quantum conceptually has a lot of potential. Being able to apply a scaling difficulty to various pieces of content, if they do go in that direction, I think has a ton of potential. And Yoshi P talking about how, hey, look, we have to make sure the content you're doing is fun and engaging. I'm paraphrasing there, but when he was talking about cosmic exploration, and like, yeah, I agree. Grinds like that need to not only have a good reward, they need to be fun by themselves. The content you're doing has to be engaging. It can't just be a repetitious grind of nonsense you're doing over and over and over again, just to elongate playtime and all that and have an excuse to play. You should log on to the game because you want to play, not because you have an excuse to play. I don't think this perspective for Final Fantasy XIV changes overnight. And I don't think it changes just because I think the story for 7.3 is really good. I think what they need to show throughout the remaining patches of Dawn Trail is a persistent desire to course correct when it comes to the overall design for this game, continue putting out really good and compelling stories, and experiment and go wild, be creative and imaginative when it comes to how you take these pieces of content. It's like, they could do a lot different when it comes to variant dungeons. We're getting one in 7.4x. Take risks, focus on making the game itself fun, instead of churning out the same general stuff time and time again. I hope point 3 is them turning a corner, because it does feel like that. And like, look, I get it. They need time to not only think up a bunch of these changes, but to also incorporate them into the game. And the bulk of that probably won't come until 8.0. And I think a lot of what Yoshi P has been saying has been rather good, and I like what he's been talking about. We need to see it executed on, and for them to walk that walk. What I think the numbers that we talked about in this video show, though, is they do have a financial reason to do all this now. I think for a lot of people, they did kind of expect Final Fantasy XIV to just be more of the same going forward. I don't think that will be the case. I don't think it's going to completely change its identity or anything like that, but I do think we'll see a change in design philosophy to some degree moving forward, and time will tell if that is enough. And if you want to stay up to date with all things Final Fantasy XIV, you should leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter, Jmulls G. I have a link in the description down below to my Discord if you want to join it and come hang out with all the jabronis there. Now let's talk crossovers. Are they too much? Should Final Fantasy XIV focus on just being FF14? Or are they an integral part of the experience? Let's talk about it. And if you want to find out my thoughts on the state of Final Fantasy XIV crossovers, you should check out this video right here for more. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.